and I work at MindManager Software. I'm happy to be your host and moderator for today's session with Mr. Chuck Frey, whose topic for today is mapping your way to project team alignment. For those of you who aren't familiar with our platform, I just want to take a moment to make sure you can get the most out of the session. First of all, I will let you know right now that we will send all registrants a recording of today's live session. The presentation will be best viewed in a larger screen format, and the area shows where on your panel you can adjust to get that larger format. If you can't hear us, please check your audio setting. Telephone participants need to enter their audio PIN. And please feel free to submit questions throughout the session, and we'll leave time at the end to respond to as many as possible. And while Chuck is doing his presentation, I'll also be on the questions and moderating them as quickly as I can for you. So what do we have for you today? Well, we are talking team alignment. Getting and keeping everyone on the same page can often be more challenging and time-consuming than most project managers would care to admit, or would actually like to spend time on, I'm sure. And yet it's absolutely critical if you hope to deliver on time, on budget, and of course to quality standards. And our guest today has a method he wants to share with you, mapping. So that's what we're going to be looking at. Chuck Frey is the author of the MindMapping Software Blog, and he's widely regarded as one of the leading experts on visual mapping and thinking. He's a frequent author on the topics of innovation and better business processes. And since I started here at MindManager, I can tell you that I've been personally feel very fortunate to have learned a great deal from him. He's always generous with his knowledge and experience. So Chuck, I'd like to formally welcome you to the program now.
Thanks, Julie.
Great. So I know that both of us wanted to just check in with the audience before we get started. If everyone doesn't mind, I'm going to launch a poll, and we'd like to find out from you, how often do the projects you manage encounter challenges with team alignment? Just going to launch this poll right now, and it'll show up on your screens. Okay, responses are coming in. All the time, frequently, sometimes, rarely, or never. Now, Chuck, what do you think in terms of which is going to be the most popular response?
I think probably between sometimes and frequently, I would guess.
Yeah, probably. I would say for myself and my own projects, yeah, because it's probably sometimes, but then there's at different points in the project where the alignment can be stronger or less aligned. So let's close it up and see what people said. I'm going to share the results. Okay, 15% all the time. Well, it is clearly a common problem. 49% said frequently, and 36% said sometimes. And we have 0 who said never. So obviously this is a key pain point, and we have found that in some of our research, as I know you're aware about that too, Chuck. So I think what I'll do now is I'll just hand the controls over to you so that we can get started. You should be able to share your screen with us momentarily, Chuck. Ah, I see your screen.
All right, so we're ready to go?
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
All right. Thanks for the fine introduction, Julie, and thanks everybody for joining us today. During the next 25 to 30 minutes, I want to give you a sense for some of the things that are happening in business today that affect this, that make this such a big challenge for many of you. We'll talk a little bit about the state of project management, share some data with you, talk about the importance of team alignment, and then move on to why mind mapping software is such a great tool for project management. And toward the end, we'll talk about 5 ways mind mapping software enhances project team alignment. And then I want to share some closing thoughts with you. So let's get started. To give you a sense for some of today's project management issues or challenges, we need to go look back to an Old Testament biblical story about the Tower of Babel. It seems that people, I believe it was in the city of Babylon, decided to build a tower that would reach all the way to heaven. Obviously, tremendous hubris and arrogance on the part of these people. Nobody had built anything this tall before. And in fact, God didn't like their arrogance. So what happened? He confounded their speech so they couldn't understand each other. They all started speaking different languages, and because the miscommunication was so severe, it made it impossible to complete the tower. You might say this was one of the world's first project management failures, in fact. But the problem hasn't gone away, obviously, as a result of the poll show. We're dealing with our own modern towers of Babel today, where miscommunication is an ongoing challenge and misunderstandings seem to be common. And in fact, after going through a decade worth of severe economic and change-related issues, trust in many organizations is low or non-existent. And I'm afraid to say that project management is suffering as a result of this, mainly because of poor team alignment. So, nice story, you're saying to yourself, but what about today's business environment? So let's take a look at some statistics. We're going to start with MindManager's Workplace Productivity and Planning Report, which was recently published. And we're going to share some other data that reinforces the depth of this problem. So according to the MindManager survey, only 23% of teams take the time to ensure alignment on risks and opportunities. This is really pretty surprising because nearly every project faces some sort of risks, whether that has to do with budget, manpower, changing priorities, shareholder issues. There's a lot of things that can derail a project these days. And opportunities as well, that's more of a function of structuring the project, brainstorming, what the ideal future should look like and how this project's going to help us get there. But really need to be taking time to think through these and have plans for risks and opportunities. And with only 1 in 4 teams doing this, it's clearly a big problem. Some more data from the MindManager study. Half of respondents said when projects fail, it's because of poor team alignment. And I think you're sensing a theme here, miscommunication, lack of effective communication. But as we'll see a bit later in this presentation, the problem isn't just limited to the immediate members of the project team. It's actually a bigger problem than that, as we'll see. In preparation for this presentation, I also looked at some other sources of data. This one comes from a consultancy called IT Cortex. They said almost 2/3 of projects fail due to communication breakdowns. And then the most damning data in my mind of all, it comes from the Project Management Institute, PMI. They would be considered to be the godfathers of project management, if you will. They are the organization that provides training and expertise. They've created a project management body of knowledge that literally every professional project manager uses. And according to them, only 1 in 4 projects succeed. That's a horrible success rate. Clearly, this is a crisis in desperate need of a solution. So let's look at what that may look like. I just want to touch briefly on alignment. It matters not only at the start of the project, but throughout it. Obviously, if people aren't aligned, a lot of things can go wrong. If there's not a shared vision and shared understanding of what they need to accomplish, the team just can't perform well. And I chose the picture of the famous Blue Angels here because they literally fly 3 feet apart from wingtip to canopy. That's amazing. But I'm drawing a parallel between that and today's teams. Today's teams must solve their communication problems in order to perform at the high levels that the business requires. And as I implied just a few minutes ago, the alignment of the members of the core project team is only one part of the challenge. Literally every project has a guidance committee or stakeholders that it reports to. These people have a pretty big amount of power over the fate of the project. They provide the funding, the support, oftentimes the staffing, and if they sense that the project is going off the rails, they can just as quickly pull that support. So they need to be aligned with the project's objectives and expected outcomes, and there needs to be good ongoing communication with them so they get the sense that the project is proceeding well and it has a good chance of reaching its objectives. But even beyond the stakeholders or guidance committee, we got to look at the organization as well, because for that project to be a success, it needs to be aligned with the overall goals of the organization. And if it's not, it's literally a rogue project and its chances of survival are probably rather small. So we see a very strong need to increase team alignment. And obviously we want to increase our odds of project success to improve on the figures that we saw earlier. And I want to submit to you that mind mapping software is one very powerful way to do that. And we're going to dig into why that is. So why we talked about what, now we're going to talk about why project management benefits from using a mind mapping software to design and manage the project. And what we're assuming here is that you have a laptop and a projector and a screen at the front of the room, and you're using that to create a mind map that's capturing your team's ideas at the beginning of the project during that design stage. So why does it facilitate that so well? First of all, speed of idea capture makes it ideal for team brainstorming. You can actually capture ideas in a mind map without a whole lot of initial regard to where you're putting it within the map, because one of the second reason it's an effective project management tool is that the map structure is so flexible. You can literally organize and reorganize it at will. It can evolve along with your needs. And as I said, you can capture ideas and organize them later. A great degree of freedom in doing that. Transparency is another important aspect of this. It's much clearer where your ideas fit on screen within a mind map than on a whiteboard or on a series of flip charts that are stuck to the wall. And if people can see their ideas are being taken seriously and where they fit into the overall picture, they tend to be more engaged. And they get excited about seeing the plan evolve and having a role in that. And it tends to even bring introverts out to be better participants. And from that very same mind map that we use to brainstorm ideas, we can turn around and use that as an implementation and planning tool. We can take the outcome of that brainstorming process and use it to produce action items or tasks with reminders and email notifications. It's a very powerful planning tool. And there's a lot of options for sharing the output of the meeting. If all of your team have MindManager or another mind mapping software program, you can share it in its native format. You can output it as a PDF. You can put it on a page of your intranet as an interactive map, or embed the map into a document. There's really a lot of options here as far as sharing the meeting output. You can use a mind mapping software to do risk management, which as we saw earlier, is something that a lot of teams overlook or ignore. And stakeholder management, you really need to have a plan in place to anticipate what their objections are likely to be, what their pain points are that you're trying to address, and how you're going to communicate with them on an ongoing basis and try and mitigate any potential personality problems and other issues that could get in the way as you implement the project. It's also a great tool for monitoring and controlling. It's not just a brainstorming and planning tool. You could actually use it to keep track of the progress of the project throughout its implementation. If you've spent any time with mind mapping software, you know that many of the higher end programs like MindManager have a Gantt view, so you can see the timeline. You can tell which tasks are getting behind or at risk of falling behind, what the critical path is, and those sorts of things. And if we step back to kind of a 50,000 foot level or view again, it really helps you to develop a shared vision of the project, both at the beginning and throughout the project implementation. And I just wanted to share with you this quote from PMI, the Project Management Institute. As I said, these guys are the standard setters for professional project management. And the fact that they recognize mind mapping software as a very effective project management tool really says a lot. I think that's amazing. So we looked at the why of mind mapping software for project management. Now let's take a closer look at the how it enhances project team alignment. As I indicated earlier, it enables the team to brainstorm on project design. And if you look at mind mapping software versus tools like Microsoft Project, Primavera, and other dedicated project management tools. The latter are effective for project management, for managing the implementation. It's like a spreadsheet and Gantt chart on steroids, but it really does nothing in terms of project design and that planning part that's so important. And I mentioned before, in a group environment with the mind map projected at the front of the room, all the team members can contribute their ideas. They can see where they fit into the overall picture. And although I don't address this with a dedicated slide, you can actually use templates and within MindManager something called map parts. So you have a ready-made framework where you just fill in the details. That helps you make sure you have a more complete plan. It saves time, and you're not just dealing with a blank slate. You've got a framework that you can follow. I just want to take a little sidestep here to talk about the traditional ways that project planning and brainstorming is typically done with whiteboards and flip charts. You have a very limited canvas. Obviously, once you've filled up a flip chart, you need to tear off the sheet, affix it to the wall. By the end of the meeting, you might have the entire wall papered with these ideas, and they're listed in more or less a random order. They're anchored to those pieces of paper. It's awfully hard to move them around or regroup them. With the whiteboard, once it's full, somebody has to take a picture of the whiteboard, and then it has to be erased, and immediately you lose everything that you had before unless you have some way to share that image or project it. So a lot of limitations here, not to mention that in both cases, at the end of the meeting, the facilitator has to sit down and process all of this and create a report or assignments, some sort of a outcomes of the meeting, and that has to be done from scratch. It's obviously very time consuming. Meanwhile, the engagement level and the enthusiasm is starting to wane. In contrast to mind mapping software, you can share the map immediately using any one of the methods that we just described. We need to help the team understand the context of the project. That's critically important. And one way to do that is to start with the end in mind. Start with the ideal future state and work your way backwards to what you need to do now. So we start out with the outcomes that the project is supposed to produce. And from there, we think back to the project outputs. What outputs need to come out of this project in order to create those ideal outcomes? And then all the way back to where we are now, what inputs or activities do we need to focus on to create those outputs and again, those outcomes that ideally we want to see? So start at the future, work back to the present day. I want to focus on a couple of tactical advantages of mind mapping software during my presentation here. This is one of them. Because teams often are composed of people who haven't worked with mind mapping software before or aren't real comfortable with it, it's easy for them to get overwhelmed. And one way to prevent that is to focus in on one branch at a time. With MindManager, that can be done with the filters. And essentially what you're doing is making the rest of the map disappear except for the current branch that you've selected. What that does is it removes a lot of distractions and helps people focus on that one element of the map so you can develop that fully. When you're done with that, then remove the filter, move on to the next section of your plan if you're working off of a template, and again, focus in on that and repeat the process. Very powerful, highly recommended for teams that aren't that familiar with mind mapping. Symbols and icons, these aren't quite so useful in the brainstorming stage, but when you get to the point where you're developing the plan out of the ideas that you've generated, it's very, very valuable. You can use them to provide visual classification and prioritization. What you see on your screen here are priority numbers. Those ship with MindManager, and you can use them to visually indicate what's most important, what's next, and so forth. And the symbols and icons can be used to denote different types of topics. Say, for example, some of the topics in your map might have a light bulb that indicates those are ideas. Another set of topics may have a set of scales, the old-fashioned two basket scales. That could indicate that those items need further discussion and decisions made about them, but you can visually skim the map and quickly see what's related. As well, within MindManager, I believe you can also filter on those symbols and icons, make everything else disappear and just have those items that meet your symbol search criteria appear on screen. Very valuable as your map gets larger and more complex. And the idea of a parking lot. Inevitably, during the brainstorming part of project development, you have most of the ideas that fit into the map. They have logical places that they belong, but there's always a few that don't. And you don't want to just pitch those to the side or forget about them. You can create a floating topic. You can call it a parking lot, you can call it whatever you want, but that's where you can place these items. And then later on, once the plan map has evolved further, you can drag and drop them to the places where they need to be. What this does is it helps the contributors of those ideas stay engaged. They see that you're treating their ideas with respect. You're not making a decision immediately about them, but you're not throwing them away either. You're putting them somewhere where they're still very visible, so at the proper time, you can figure out where they belong. And as I said, that really helps with engagement. Again, if you step back and look at what we're trying to do here, we're trying to build consensus within the team. And the mind map is a way to do that. You can use your project planning map to document some of the discussion and the opposing viewpoints or the opinions of people, or you can create a separate map that's linked to your project map. It's up to you. But by putting the flow of discussion on the screen in a visual form, it helps people reach consensus more quickly. And it can be a very powerful tool for that. One caution, as I've talked to some professional project managers, they tell me that if you have team members who aren't familiar with mind mapping software, they can quickly become overwhelmed as you start brainstorming. So it makes sense to spend 5 or 10 minutes to just give an overview of what the mind mapping software is, what it does, and how it will be used during your brainstorming session. So they get more of a comfort level with it and don't get overwhelmed. You want them to stay engaged. You don't want them to shut down because they have no idea what's going on screen or what you're talking about. So very important for teams with a lot of mind mapping newbies. You also have an opportunity here when you're done to present a single page plan to your stakeholders, to the organization at large. And even people who aren't that familiar with mind mapping software or mind maps in general, they can intuitively understand what you are presenting here. They could see it's a visual hierarchy, a visual outline, and they're much more likely to refer to it during project implementation than a 50-page document, where in fact a lot of the structural arrangement, a lot of the hierarchy is lost within paragraphs and sentences. And it's just a very foreboding thing to look at a 50-page document and go, hell no, I'm not going to read that now. I'm too busy. But I can look at this at a glance plan in mind map form and get a lot more value out of it. I touched on this just a few minutes ago. It's a framework to talk through issues. These issues are going to come up inevitably, whether they're within your team or with your stakeholders, but you can work through these on screen and verbally, and you can record the key points in the map and keep those for posterity. So you always have a kind of a trail of breadcrumbs, if you will, so you can look through how you reach that decision. You can always go back and look at that and understand what your thought process was leading up to it. Another thing that mind mapping software does to increase engagement and alignment is it enables a more accurate project scope. I'm sure if any of you have handled projects on an ad hoc or professional basis, you know how painful it is to get in the middle of an implementation and realize you forgot something really important. Placing all of this in a visual plan makes it much easier to see what's missing, what needs to be fleshed out, what needs to be rearranged or combined. And you can certainly create the Word document or PDF text plan, you can export from MindManager directly to Word and continue developing it there, but you got to have a complete skeleton, if you will, and this enables you to see that, and it makes it much more likely that you're going to have all the important pieces. This again refers back to the idea of templates and map parts. If you have a template with the major topics and questions or key considerations already laid out there, you can use that as a guide as you walk through each element to make sure that you have something complete. It'll prevent a lot of problems later on. It enables the team to do an accurate, complete risk analysis. We've touched on this a couple times. It's critically important. Every project has some sort of risks associated with it. It really behooves you to identify those risks, prioritize them, and create some sort of even simple plans on how you're going to respond, and have some idea what the warning signs are. How are you going to monitor it? How are you going to tell if there's a potential problem rearing its head? And then what are you going to do about it? And what you're looking at is basically a template with all the major sections of it, 5 main topics. Within each of those, there are elements that you need to fill in. There are questions that you need to ask, and you can actually use this template to record your answers to those and end up with a complete risk management plan when you're done. Another powerful thing you can do to help smooth the implementation and keep alignment and keep communication going effectively during the project implementation is to create a dashboard. Think about this in the same way you think of the dashboard on your car. Your car's dashboard gathers together all of the critical information you need to know what's happening with the car, to know what you're doing as far as driving. And a project dashboard in MindMap form is pretty much the same. It can contain background information such as your project plan and charter. You see here an organizational chart. You could have people's contact phone numbers and email addresses and Slack names and whatever you need to have there so you can quickly jump from this dashboard in one click and communicate with them. On the left-hand side, you see a budget overview. MindManager enables you to plug numbers in there and have it calculate in real time. The project artifacts are some of the background information, maybe previous projects, could be if you have some of these elements like the charter and so forth in other formats or even in mind maps, you can put them all within there. They're out of the way, but you can still get to them in one click. So the project dashboard can be designed however you want to meet your needs. It's a living document. It's something that's going to bring clarity throughout the life of the project, and it's a very valuable tool to have. The mind map also becomes the medium for shared project updates. One of the challenges for teams in the past has been if all of your team members don't have licensed copies of MindManager or some other mind mapping software, they couldn't contribute updates to their tasks. MindManager in the last couple of versions has changed that by including SharePoint integration in their premium product, so that if you have team members who don't have licensed copies of the software, they can go into SharePoint, see their tasks, update them, and that automatically flows back into your project map in real time, and it enables them to stay engaged, to stay involved, and to see where the project is at and where their pieces of it are at. And I think that's really, really valuable. And I just want to share with you a couple of closing thoughts. Fundamentally, the mind map is a tool for developing a shared project vision. We need to have the same picture in our heads of what we need to accomplish, what the objectives are, how we're going to get there, and what your and my pieces of that are that we're responsible for. So it really helps promote and continue to keep that shared project vision in front of the team, which helps improve alignment. I touched on this briefly before, but I just want to reinforce it because I think it's so powerful. I've talked to professional project managers who swear this is the case. When you put a mind map at the front of the room on a screen, it really amps up the energy level in the room because people get excited. They think their ideas are important and valuable, and they want to see them treated that way. And if they see them on screen, it gets them even more excited, and they're more likely to be engaged and stay engaged if they see their ideas being treated with respect and seeing their ideas become part of the overall project plan. The other element is more of a creative issue. From a creativity standpoint, oftentimes, if you have a team brainstorming ideas, you want to permit people to improve on each other's ideas. Many minds make better ideas. Other people adding on to your idea may transform it from a mediocre idea to a really valuable one. So that's another aspect of this that the mind mapping software really supports very well. So as you can see, mind mapping software has a pretty strong chance of increasing your odds of project success, improving on those dire numbers we saw earlier. And in closing, I just want to share this with you. I have created an e-course, a brief e-course that talks about the fundamentals of project management with mind mapping software. It goes much more into the nuts and bolts than I could today. It provides a glossary of project management terms, a process for planning projects visually, and some tips and resources that you can use as well. And there is a shortened link to it.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Chuck.
That's it for my presentation.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that with us. We've had a lot of great questions come in, and I am going to let you have a quick little sip of water before we need to get into them. So while we're doing that, I would like to ask the audience another poll question just before we get into the questions. If you would like to learn more about MindManager mapping software as shown by Chuck on the screen, I'm going to open up this poll and you can let me know if you'd like any more information. And it should appear on your screen now. You can say, yes, please, I'd like some more info. Yes, please, I'd like to actually see it live and in a demo environment. No, thanks, I'm already a user, which I can see by the questions. We have quite a few people that are in that category, and comments, and no thanks, not now. So please feel free to let us know how you feel about this, and we're going to get into some questions. I'll just give you a couple more seconds to finish up this poll, and we should be there. Okay, so Chuck, I'll let you know right now, one of the first questions came up early in the session related to when you were talking about brainstorming, and someone asked, can anyone facilitate a brainstorming question?
Or a brainstorming session?
Yes, session.
Yeah. I wouldn't recommend it. There's a couple of aspects to this. One is you really need to be pretty well versed in the software that you're using, in this case MindManager, so that you can quickly record ideas, you can rearrange them as the group decides. And the other aspect has to do with some of the soft issues, the communication issues, especially as you're walking through issues that come up, areas where you need to reach consensus. I think you need somebody who has at least some skill in helping to guide people towards a common understanding and a common view.
Okay, great. I have a question here from someone with the same name as me, Julie. So I am going to take her question. It says, is there still integration between MindManager and MS Project?
Yes, you can easily export your mind map and the tasks you've created to project.
Okay. Another question we have here is, and this might be something other people may have come across that you've worked with before, Chuck. William says, I like mind mapping, but the problem I've had is that in a project environment, I have to spend some time training people who aren't necessarily interested in learning a new thing. Do you have any tips on overcoming that?
Yeah, I don't think you need to take them through a lot of detail, but just help them understand just the basics. Because you as a facilitator are actually working with the software. You don't need to know how watches are made to tell what time it is. You just need to know just kind of the top level. This is what you're seeing. This is how we're going to use it. If you have any questions along the way, ask.
Okay, cool. Let's see what else we have here. We have Jack, who asks, would dashboards typically have linked submaps to them?
What dashboards?
Would dashboards?
You create your own dashboard and you can create your own linked maps. I think MindManager gives you the ability, if you have a large complex map, to break off a piece of it and create a submap, and it automatically links both ways. Or I think you can just set up that connection yourself by doing a file, linking a file to your topic.
Yes,
so
correct.
it's really up to you.
Great. Okay, we have this. Here's the next question, Chuck. It says, the slide on start with the future and work back is a waterfall model. How does mind mapping work with agile methodologies?
I know people are using it. I'm not that familiar with it myself, but it's definitely well accepted as an agile tool. And you have a variety of views that you can use with MindManager. One of them is a right-facing map, so you can show a flow of, similar to what I did with the circles on my slide, from the flow being from top to bottom.
Okay, great. Ron asks a question. This will put you a little bit on the spot, Chuck. I know that you're familiar with many mapping softwares, but he's asking specifically about MindManager, and he says, what 2018 MindManager features are you most excited about?
Oh, I'm trying to think here what specifically is new in it. It's been a little while since I looked at it.
Yes, it was last September, and the ones that I've seen a lot of feedback on in particular is the publish feature.
Yeah, I know you redid the publishing tool. I had some problems in the past with publishing live maps where they just didn't turn out looking like they should, and oftentimes they're kind of kludged. But the new tool, I think, is fantastic. There was something. Oh, you've continued to develop the ability to create flowcharts and swim lane diagrams and that sort of thing within it. That was introduced actually in the 2017 version, but it's gotten significantly better with this version.
That sounds good.
Yep.
So we're getting to the end of our questions here. We do have an interesting one from David, and he says, in relation to the agile question that we just had, does MindManager or other mind mapping software have Kanban views? And I do find that very interesting because I think I've seen that in another webinar where people are interested in using Kanban. And I know that some of our users do use it. And I was wondering if you've spoken to other users who've used the Kanban method as well, Chuck.
I haven't spoken to them. I've seen a few maps. I think it's Kanban. Is that correct term?
Yeah, with a K.
Yeah. I know people are doing it. I don't have any experience with it myself.
Great question. David, I'll send you a follow-up resource on that. Let's see. Okay. Someone said, by the way, in follow-up to the question about trying to teach the teams, some people say, well, you could say that about almost all tools, like MS Project can be fairly difficult to use as well. It's just trying to get people used to it, I suppose. Okay, so listen, I think we are at the end of our question period. I do want to thank everybody for having sent in your suggestions, your questions, your notes, and feel free to contact me directly at julie.harrison@corel.com with anything further. Chuck and I are really pleased to have had this chance to be with you today, and we hope that he's made his strong argument to you about how mapping can really help with project team alignment. So
Yeah,
thank you, everyone. Go
just
ahead,
one
Chuck.
side note, Julie, before we end here. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in Agile. It's something I'll be looking at to cover on the blog. So keep an eye out for that.
Okay, great. Thank you. That'll be good. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day on behalf of Chuck and I. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.